We start sort of obsessively on schedule. Thank you for coming. One of the themes that's been interesting me in the face of next year is we're going to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Reformation. Why did the Reformation matter? And if we were to drive a little bit further north in the state, in South Bend, we'd find people who do know why it mattered. It messed everything up. They had everything in great control, and there was a renaissance, all kinds of great stuff going on, and then the Reformation inexplicably happened. But there have been very good scholars and very good thinkers who've argued the other way around, and I'd like to talk about that also in the context of classical Lutheran education, though my discussion of that's going to be sort of in the middle of the discussion. Let me quote a few more quotes from what I quoted from last night to start off. Lutheran Reformation, unlike our friends in South Bend, shaped the American way of life and continues to do so, politically, culturally, ethically. Let me just quote a couple of sentences that I quoted last night from political scientist Samuel P. Huntington in his 2004 book, Who Are We? In Europe, existing societies accepted or rejected the Protestant Reformation. In America, the Reformation created a new society. Unique among countries, America is the child of the Reformation. America was created as a Protestant society, just as, and for some of the same reasons, Pakistan and Israel were created as Muslim and Jewish societies in the 20th century. America, said Tocqueville in an oft-quoted phrase, was born equal and hence did not have to become so. More significantly, America was born Protestant and did not have to become so. Tocqueville, Samuel P. Huntington, Who Are We? 2004. Of course, there are different strands of institutional Protestantism, as we know, Lutheran, Calvinist, and Anglican traditions, and all of them settled in America and influenced the American way of life. But there are a number of distinctively Protestant attitudes and commitments that are based on reading the Bible and were first and most clearly expounded by Martin Luther and later accepted and developed by other Protestants. Because we arrive later than the Anglicans and the Catholics, we've sometimes been hesitant to emphasize this and we've intended to downplay the influence of key American themes and ideas that were first and foremost Lutheran. I talked about a cultural one last night. Today I'd like to talk about some political ones, Congregationalism, its influence on federalism, and the separation of church and state as interpreted according to the doctrine of the two kingdoms. Before discussing them, however, I would like to emphasize these key Reformation insights emerged from Luther's commitment to classical Christian education, what scholars call Renaissance humanism. I'd like to explore the historical fact that Luther's earliest reforms were his humanist reforms of the university curriculum at Wittenberg. From that came the insights that then developed into the religious and also cultural and political insights. The Reformation insights come later. When Martin Luther took up the chair of expounding the Bible, Lectura in Biblia, in 1513 Wittenberg, the university had 8 professors of scholastic theology. 4 Thomists, 4 Scotus. 4 studied St. Thomas Aquinas, 4 were experts in Duns Scotus. From 1507 to 1510, there was a lecture in the Via Moderna of Aachen and Biel. Greek and Hebrew were offered as what we would now call electives. Luther worked with Georg Spalatin, the father confessor and advisor of the Elector Frederick the Wise, to win the elector over to their goal of replacing the study of scholasticism with a humanist curriculum emphasizing the ancient tongues. Ernst Schwiebert, in his book on the Reformation, of which the second part is significantly entitled The Reformation as a University Movement, comments, quotes, Luther's, I'm going to call this is his word, my word, not his, conspiracy with Spalatin, quotes, caused the development of an entirely new school, in which the restoration of Latin, Greek, and Hebrew and the teaching of the Church Fathers were to be studied in the original languages in which they were written, end quotes. Before Before this happened, however, Luther was already exemplifying humanism in his teaching. The professors of scholasticism taught the relatively up-to-date developments of the theologians of the 13th and 14th century and their intellectual heirs. Dialectic replaced rhetoric as the crown of the arts of language. Luther expounded the text of the Bible in the original languages with the aid of the ancient church fathers, as he explained in 1539 in his essay on the councils and churches, quotes, "Let's take a book of the Bible and look at the interpretation of the fathers, and the same thing will happen that happened to me when I took up the epistle to the Hebrews with the gloss of St. Chrysostom, when I studied Titus and Galatians with the help of St. Augustine, and the Psalter with all the exegetes I could find." End quotes. The goal was not to contribute to the ongoing academic debate, but to return to the sources, ad fontes, primarily, of course, for a Bible scholar of the Bible, and then Augustine and other doctors of the ancient church. Student John Lang wrote to Spalatin about the effect of Luther's lectures in letter March the 10th, 1516. Quotes, "Very many students are all excited and enthusiastic about the lectures on the Bible of the early fathers, whereas the study of the scholastic doctors, so-called, attract maybe 2 or 3 students," end quotes. Luther himself wrote to Lang on May the 18th, 1517, slightly more than a year later, quotes, "Our theology and St. Augustine are progressing well with God's help in our university. Indeed, no one can expect to have any students if he doesn't want to teach this theology. That is, lecture on the Bible or St. Augustine or another father," end quotes. The results of Luther's style of teaching came to university-wide attention at the public orals of 2 of his students, Bartholomeus Bernhardi at the end of 1516 and Francis Gunther in fall of 1517. Bernhardi's examining committee included Wittenberg's leading Thomist, Andreas Bodenstein von Karlstadt, who was amazed by Bernhardi's mastery of Scripture and a citation of Augustine's De Litera et Spiritu, or Letter of the Spirit, in support of what we would recognize as Luther's views on the law and gospel and the freedom of the will, also Augustine's. Karlstadt undertook a study of Augustine as a result of these orals. It's always embarrassing when you're on the orals committee and the student knows more than you do about the situation. Though in theory they should. They just spent a year writing this thesis, after all. He hate to admit it. Because of that thesis, which was public, by the way, because of the orals, which was public, Karlstadt undertook a study of Augustine that ended eventually in his acceptance of the Reformation insights. With the support of Spalatin and the elector Frederick, who were soon joined by many of the faculty, we all know how courageous faculty are standing up against deans. Everybody who's taught at the university knows that. But many of the faculty soon joined them. Chairs were then founded for Greek and Hebrew. The curriculum reform culminated in calling to the Greek chair young Philip Melanchthon, the most promising humanist of his generation. Melanchthon's inaugural address in 1518, it was mentioned in our plenary on the first day, was a sensation. This was a very young man standing up and giving a talk on teaching in the classical Christian way, the humanist way, absolutely knocking the audience over and winning them over. Of course, Luther's teaching had already laid the foundation for this. From this point on, Wittenberg was the center of a humanist university curriculum. The great enrollments they got in the next decade, of course, were partly due to Luther and his incredible influence. It was also due to the fact it was the best place to get a humanist education north of the Alps. The humanist reforms of the university curriculum, in accord with the ideals of classical Lutheran education, Renaissance humanism, led directly to the development of Luther's insights. When Luther read Matthew 4:17 in Greek, he realized that what Jesus had not commanded his followers, penitentiam agite, do penance, are to do anything, but metanoeta in Greek. Change, meta as metamorphosis, no as to nous your mind, change your mind. Convert, not do. And indeed, the presentation of this insight in the 95 Theses spread what was happening in Wittenberg all over Europe. Luther learned other insights from his careful study of Greek vocabulary. For example, came to understand the Greek word ecclesia, previously and commonly translated church, referred at first to an assembly. In ancient Athens, for example, meeting of the citizens was an ecclesia, an assembly, and then in the Bible to a congregation. The true basis of Christian community was not a faraway hierarchy headed by the Pope with fancy buildings in Rome. If you think of some fancy buildings in St. Louis, that is my fault. I haven't brought it up. It's the local congregation, as Luther argued in his work, that a Christian assembly or congregation, the title itself is significant, has the right and power to judge all teaching and to call, approve, and dismiss doctors established and proven by Scripture, published in 1523. The Congregationalist church polity took a while to prosper in Lutheran lands, because frankly Lutherans needed the princes to protect them from the emperor. It was clearly understood by English Lutheran William Tyndale in his writings and his translation of the New Testament into English. Its significance did not escape the English authorities. Chancellor Thomas More made it illegal to translate ecclesia as congregation in sermons or published writings. I think our laws get into detail, right? The original political correctness, talking about church as congregation. England was all, by the way, I mentioned sermons and published writings. It was already illegal in England to translate the Bible, and that had been so for some time, since the time of Wycliffe. England was the only European country where it was illegal to translate the Bible. Tyndale met an early death in 1536, largely because of events set underway by Moore, who was himself by that time facing similar fate. But Tyndale's translation, completed by Miles Coverdale, was the basis of most English translations of the Bible over the next century. The latest estimate is that the New Testament and the parts of the Old Testament translated by Tyndale, King James Bible preserves Tyndale's renderings 80% of the time. The Anglican Book of Common Prayer still keeps Coverdale's translations for the Psalms, and Tyndale's version of the New Testament epistles and gospel pericopes are also found. Luther's humanist reading of the Bible led to his teaching on the two kingdoms in his 1523 work, Temporal Authority to What Extent Should Be Obeyed, on the basis of his exegesis of Paul, Romans 13. Although he sometimes includes parental authority as one form of the secular kingdom of the left hand, he understood from his exegesis of Genesis that family was fundamental to human life and distinguished society into three orders: family, state, and church. And let me just throw in a few quotes from his Genesis lectures, which is what he was teaching his students. This life is profitably divided into three orders: life in the home, life in the state, life in the church. To whichever order you belong, whether you're a husband, officer of the state, teacher of the church, look about you and see whether you have done full justice to your calling. Again, in another place, God has appointed three social classes to which he's given the command not to let sins go unpunished. First is that of parents, who should maintain strict discipline in their house when ruling the domestics and the children. Second is the government, for the officers of the state bear the sword for the purpose of coercing the obstinate and remiss by means of their power of discipline. He's referring to Romans 13:4. The third is that of the church, which governs by the word. By this threefold authority, God has protected the human race against the devil, the flesh, and the world, to the end that offenses may not increase but may be cut off. Parents are the children's tutors, as it were. Those who are grown up and are remiss, the government curbs through the executioner. In the church, those who are obstinate are excommunicated. End quotes. Luther's three orders were developed by later Protestants who theorized on their role within the empire. A classic exposition of what we would call federalism was written by German Calvinist Friedrich Althusius in 1603. Althaus drew on Aristotle's Poetics, book 1, chapter 2, where the philosopher saw society developing from family into village and then into city, state, or polis. By the way, note, it begins with family, not the individual. At the end of chapter 2, Aristotle goes back and says, Remember, I'm not talking about individuals. Human beings are not born as individuals. Individuals are not a natural kind that could reproduce. If someone is an individual, he's an animal or a god. A zoon, a theos. Human beings are born into a family, and family is the basic unit. Medieval thinkers, of course, had already used Aristotle, and Aquinas understood perfectly the significance of the second chapter of the Politics. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Popes Leo XIII and Pius XI developed a parallel notion, parallel to federalism, of subsidiarity. It must be remarked that in recent papal documents, subsidiarity has typically been trumped by what the popes call solidarity, and even calls for world government, which is quite a reversal on the Christian tradition. The Protestant tradition tended to develop in the direction of federalism, with evidence from the Bible and evidence from the classical world to back it up. In fact, one of the problems with the Catholic view, even with great popes like Leo XIII and Pius XI, is the sort of abstract nature of the defense of solidarity, not rooted in historical basis. For Americans, an important stage is represented by the Puritan ideas of government that were introduced in America in the Mayflower Compact, signed on November the 11th, 1620. It is significant for America's own self-image that in the first volume of Tocqueville's Democracy in America, which is much more historical and much less abstract, and therefore much less popular than the second volume, he quotes in entirety the Mayflower Compact. Let me just read it over, it's very brief. In the name of God, amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign, Lord, King James, by the grace of God of Great Britain, France and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, etc. Having undertaken, for the glory of God, and advancement of the Christian faith, and the honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. Well, they're a little bit hard. Do by these presents solemnly and mutual, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue thereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices, from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. End quotes. The colonists affirm their loyalty to their sovereign, King James. They, however, by means of covenant, form their own government. This will be a civil body politic, employing Latin, English, and Greek to assert that they are a political, not a ecclesiastical group composed of citizens, even though they are subjects of their most dread sovereign lord. They are also, in their new regime, citizens, civil body politic. They promise to pass, quotes, just and equal laws that shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, end quotes. 2 points. It's for the general good of the colony. There's no reference to individual rights. There is no, or if there are few references to that, by the end of the 18th century. Start seeing Mr. Madison talk about that. And even when he does, he speaks about the general good as well. In the beginning, it's always about the general good. I also like that the just and equal laws are such as shall be thought most meet and convenient. If you're a user of the old Lutheran hymnal, you remember meat showing up just before we take communion there. In the new service book of the Third Order, it has to tell you at least properly. It's come dignum in the Latin Mass, axiomatically form. They like to cut it out. It's a wonderful word, very useful. The Pilgrims were founding a community, and they published its basic premises in writing. This is also significant. It's significant that they understand the different levels. It's they understand that they have both Christian and classical background. It's also important that they wrote this document. I mean, they just went over the sea. Why didn't they get out there, get on the land, start chopping down trees and building things? This idea certainly doesn't come from the English tradition. England had no written constitution. It still has no written constitution. Their model, in my opinion, and there were several models by this time, it's almost a century, their model, in my opinion, is the Augsburg Confession, where subjects presented to a ruler a statement of fundamental principles. And we then see other Protestant groups do this. This is where we get the idea. It seems so obvious to us. Today you can't do anything without a mission statement, right? Okay, the mission statement is the low, degenerate form, right, of a very noble tradition that starts when the Augsburg Confession is offered to the emperor. Please.
Does not the Magna Carta state that nobles at the time had individual rights? They couldn't be thrown in prison without due process and so on and so forth?
The Magna Carta is a very interesting document. It's important because basically of us, although there were English Whigs in the 17th century, because they understood what I just said. England has no written constitution. Now that's not right, because even though we can say, before 1530 nobody had a written constitution, and the Augsburg Confession is a kind of constitution. So their great leader, Sir Edward Coke, who spelled his name C-O-K-E because the English pronounce it as they spell, went looking for a document that could be the English Constitution. And he chose the Magna Carta. It does have one wonderful sentence in it, that everyone has a right to trial by his peers, which is absolutely fantastic. It also has a couple of provisions about the City of London, which are still in effect. It's why the Lord Mayor of London is so valuable. But for the whole part, it is a personal set of individual rights, mainly for nobles. Please go ahead.
But the Anglo-Saxons had a very deep tradition, even before they conquered England, of individual rights and due process, Second Amendment kind of thing, and ruled by a council and so on and so forth. So that Anglo-Saxon individual rights was firmly entrenched in British life.
So let me say, as Whigs, as people who support what the American founders did, Whigs were convinced that this was true. Furthermore, they had very good evidence for it because they had Tacitus. They had Tacitus' Germania. Tacitus Germania presents the Germans this way. And they have arms. All important decisions are made by a public assembly that vote. Notoriously, they debate drunk and then vote the next day when they're sober. A tradition which tried to get President Harrison to reintroduce, but we wasn't going to go that far. I know it's too radical. We'll have to wait for a couple of years before we finally have our debates, all drinking, especially in Milwaukee. It's a shame not to do it. Let me just say, in deference to the historical record, and also in deference to the fact that I'm emphasizing a different aspect here, is the things you took. All the great Whigs of the 17th century in England and all our founders thought that everything you're saying is right, that they were Germans. In fact, I have an essay in the ISI journal, Modern Age, about the German origins of America. They had a neocon come on and write a response to it. Kind of a very polite response, by the way. He only applied when I was a Nazi wife, so I thought that was great. It really was polite. I think they were a polite neocon. They're doing this. But to show that these German traditions, behind the common law, were believed by Whigs who were fundamental for the 17th and then in our country in the 18th century. For the most part, however, they are your rights as a member of a group. That is, individual rights are, I think if you go through the basic documents of the American foundings from the early 17th century to the Declaration, you won't see individual rights emphatic. You'll start seeing them in the Federalist Papers. I know it's a great belief that our individual rights are protected, but where our rights are protected as citizens. There's no reference in the Mayflower Compact individual rights. They are civil body politic. They're citizens who form a body which is political, not ecclesiastical. Certainly the development of individual rights is an interesting and important development. But I don't think you'll find it until later on. However, there's no doubt that many Whigs, as the 18th century went on, believed that the Germans had that.
Just as a third point, the Anglo-Saxons did believe that an individual had the right to defend not only himself but his family against tyranny.
Yes, that is right.
So that basic individual right to defend yourself against tyranny, not just your family, but your individual self, it is a great basis for individual rights, is it not?
Yes, it is a great basis, although in my opinion, which may not be right on this point, it was his position as head of a family that gave it. Man is the master of his castle. Please.
Of course, maybe this was later, but didn't you have to be an individual of good standing in the church in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in order to own land, enter into contracts, and have legitimate citizenry?
Well, for the most part, in the colonies and in England, ownership of property was essential. That was why you got to vote. And among the Germans, it was that you fought. And this is also true of the Greeks and Romans. People fought. Why were women allowed to vote? Well, because people who fought got to vote. Athens became a democracy because they developed a navy. Instead of needing expensive armor and shield and spear, you just had to be able to row, because you could make the boats go. Well, everybody with two hands, you can see who's being prejudiced against here, everybody with two hands could row, so therefore every Athenian who was freeborn got the vote. But they became a democracy based on their role as citizens, and citizens are for the most part, soldier farmers, or anyhow, soldier property owners. What happened in Athens, they never abolished the property requirement, but they stopped enforcing it. And Aristotle notes this indignantly in the Athenian Constitution, which was discovered in the 1890s. The reason why is they never got rid of the property requirement. Property means you have a family. So does that make sense? I mean, there's certainly still a direct development to the idea of individual rights. And the idea of conscience, which is really the basic of the vice, comes from religion. So individual's conscience can't be forced. And that, of course, is individual. You don't have a conscience based on being a member of the family. Actually, we did discuss the Corleone crime family earlier today, but aside from that, you don't have that. You have the individual conscience. And that's how other things develop into an individual right. Does that make sense? I mean, there is a development here, too. Protestant conceptions of what was later called separation of church and state did not aim at driving faith in Christianity out of the public square. I'm using contemporary language, last generation language, but reflected Martin Luther's idea of the two kingdoms or regimes. God, I'm not telling you guys anything new. God rules the world, not directly, but through two institutions. God rules the church, king of the right hand, which offers word and sacrament, love, grace, forgiveness to repentant and believing Christians. But he also rules through the state, the king of the left hand, which administers the law for and over all its subjects, are citizens, Christian or not, believers or not. Everybody shares in that. Paul's epistle to the Romans, 13, with its statements, the pagan Roman state was instituted by God, is a fear to the evil, not the good, and was God's servant, were influential in shaping the views of Luther and Calvin. If you ever read Dante's work on monarchia, you'll see he read the same documents and drew the same conclusions. That the state was a legitimate foundation by God, not under the Bishop of Rome. Not a popular view to hold in his day. The work was burned several times after his death. These views are fundamental for the Protestant founders of the American Republic. James Madison says this clearly in a letter to Pastor F.L. Schaeffer, dated December the 3rd, 1821. Schaeffer had delivered a sermon at St. Matthew's Church in New York, in which he had explained the Lutheran doctrine of the two kingdoms and related the situation in America directly to it. He then had it printed up and sent it to the people we still would consider the major founders. You know that John Adams got a copy and responded politely. Madison got a copy and responded very clearly and significantly. Let me just quote a few sentences from it. This is Madison to Lutheran pastor F.L. Schaeffer about Schaeffer's sermon on the two kingdoms and its role in America. Madison, quote, "Your sermon illustrates the excellence of the system, which by a due distinction, to which the genius and courage of Luther led the way, between what is due Caesar and what is due God, best promotes the discharge of both obligations. A mutual independence is found most friendly to practical religion, to social harmony, and to political prosperity," end quotes. Madison assented explicitly to an interpretation of separation of church and state as formulated by Luther, with a humanist respect for the classical tradition and a belief in the primacy of the Bible over ecclesiastical tradition. These conclusions on the level of principle include the ideas that both religion and the state are essential for human flourishing, individual and social. Both religion, or church and state, are instituted by God, and neither has a veto power over the other. This interpretation of separation of church and state leaves no opening for purging religion from the public life of society, nor a fortiori for building a wall of separation between church and state. You may have heard those words before. The last expression, I should have said, quotes, building a wall separation between church and state, end quotes, is found in a letter penned by President Thomas Jefferson to Messrs. Nehemiah Dodge, Ephraim Robbins, and Stephen S. Nelson, a committee of the Danbury Baptist Association in the state of Connecticut, written in 1802. Jefferson wrote inter alia, quotes, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Thus, building a wall of separation between church and state, Congress thus inhibited from action respecting religion, and the executive authorized only to execute their acts, I have refrained from prescribing even those occasional performances of devotion practiced indeed by the executive of another nation as the legal head of its church, but subject here as religious exercises only to the voluntary regulations and discipline of each respective sect," end quotes, Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists. Jefferson was not a member of the First Congress, if you believe the movies. He was in Paris chasing women around with Tuileries gardens. Not which may not be true, by the way. Movies don't always tell the truth. Not establishing a particular religion or denomination is not the same thing as erecting a wall of separation between religion and the government, and prima facie forbidding performances of devotion, as Jefferson was doing, prohibits the free exercise of religion. The First Congress that approved the Bill of Rights also reconfirmed the Northwest Ordinance. I'm going to quote the Northwest Ordinance again, which asserted in its third section, quotes, "Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of learning should forever be encouraged," end quotes. Government was involved in encouraging education, and education, the goals of education were religion, morality, and knowledge. You seem to have reduced the list a little bit. The same Congress approved chaplains for itself and military chaplains for the Army. Jefferson contemplated with supreme reverence his own misinterpretation of the First Amendment. His views should not be privileged before the views of James Madison, who was a member of the First Congress, formulated the words in the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment and oversaw its passage through Congress. It's a little bit unfair to give Jefferson, who wasn't even in the country at the time, the interpretation of Madison, who was the guy who was responsible for the form we have. The early American Republic was guided by a view of the roles of church and state interpreted in the light of the doctrine of the two kingdoms. The nation had no established religion as a nation, although some states had established churches until the 1830s. Congress opened its sessions with prayer and still does so. It's the one that the Supreme Court doesn't dare touch, because the day after they did, their power of review would be taken away from them by the Congress. So their courage in standing up for their views draws a line at stopping Congress from beginning all its sessions with prayer. There are chaplains of the National Armed Forces. Jefferson's rule of separation appears in no legal document or court case. It was a personal letter to the Danbury Baptists. Had no influence on U.S. law practice, which was dominated by the Lutheran doctrine that God ruled society through his two kingdoms, church and state, which are both indispensable for a fulfilled and flourishing human life. It was only in 1940 that the Supreme Court, the technical term is, incorporated the prohibition that Congress shall make no law into a restriction on the states. Cases Cantwell v. Connecticut. It was in 1947, Justice Black, in his majority decision in Everson versus the Board of Education, introduced for the first time into U.S. law Jefferson's metaphor in the letter to the Danbury Baptists. The court was affirming New Jersey's reimbursing students who use public transportation to go to school, whether it was public or parochial. 15 years passed before the court began issuing a series of decisions that halted traditional practices of public schools, including non-denominational prayer, 1962, Anglo Vitale, Bible reading, 1963, Abington School District versus Shemp, and displaying the Ten Commandments, 1980, Stone v. Graham. The United States began as what we today call a third world country, inhabited by a few million people scattered along the east coast of North America. It developed into a continent-wide nation that was both prosperous and powerful. There are many factors behind this development: economic, social, and political. There's no need to undervalue or exaggerate any of these multiple factors. There is also no reason to deny the fundamental contribution to America's distinctive way of life that comes from Luther's careful humanist reading of the Scriptures. Ecclesia, as congregation. The three orders of family, state, and congregation, leading to the development of federalism, the distinctive doctrine of the two kingdoms, based on Paul Romans 13 as the basis of separation of church and state. As we celebrate the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, we need to understand and insist on its special significance in creating the United States of America. We also need to understand the effect on our way of life of the repudiation of these insights and principles. The incorporation of the states into the constraints imposed by the Bill of Rights, which were constraints on the central government, Congress shall make no law, entails the unilateral abolition, repeal of the 10th Amendment, and a serious blow against the principles of federalism. Equally disastrous is the move away from interpreting the separation of church and state in light of Luther's doctrine of the two kingdoms, where church and state have an important role in the life of society, into one in which we interpret the separation by Jefferson's metaphor of the wall of separation. The founders' ideas were expressed in Article 3 of the Northwest Ordinance, which was itself passed by the Continental Congress, by the way, while the Constitutional Convention was going on, but was immediately reaffirmed by the First Congress. And I don't mind saying the words over again. Religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Those are the three goals of education for the founders: religion, morality, and knowledge. And the Supreme Court began to forbid prayer and Bible readings in public school, and the traditionalists predicted a future not of church-state neutrality, which we were promised, but rather of hostility. Justice Potter Stewart wrote in his dissent to Abington School District v. Shemp in 3 quotes. A compulsory state education system so structures a child's life that if religious exercises are held to be an impermissible activity in schools, religion is placed at an artificial and state-created disadvantage. Viewed in this light, permission of such exercises for those who want them is necessary if the schools are truly to be neutral in matters of religion. A refusal to permit religious exercises thus is seen not as the realization of state neutrality, but rather as the establishment of a religion of secularism, or at the least as government support of the beliefs of those who think that religious exercises should be conducted only in private, end quotes. Who were right? The people who thought that would never happen are Justice Bonner Stewart. Samuel Huntington was clear about the role of Protestant ideas in our nation's history in his 2004 book, Who Are We? America was founded as a Protestant society. For 200 years from its settlement, almost all Americans were Protestants, with substantial Catholic immigration, first in Germany and Ireland, and Italy and Poland. The proportion of Protestants declined fairly steadily. By 2000, about 60% of Americans were Protestants. Protestant beliefs, values, and assumptions, however, have been the core element, along with the English language, of America's settler culture. And that culture continued to pervade and shape American life, society, and thought, even as the proportions of Protestants decline, because they are central to American culture. Protestant values deeply influence Catholicism and other religions in America. They have shaped American attitudes toward private and public morality, economic activity, government, and public policy. Samuel Huntington argued, end quotes, by the way, Huntington argued that if America is to maintain its distinctive way of life, it must preserve these Protestant values, even if Protestants were to become a minority. If he's right, it's especially incumbent on Lutherans to instruct our fellow citizens about the central role in creating our national way of life played by the insights and principles of the Reformation. Insights and principles that were discovered by theologians who were also classical Christian educators and read the Bible and important classical texts in the tradition of the 7 liberal arts, including Congregationalism in church politics, federalism in civic life, interpreting the role of religion and state in the light of Luther's doctrine of the 2 kingdoms. Where these insights and principles have been marginalized or repudiated, as with Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state, we must return to them if we want a free and just society. The truths we keep coming back and back to that Robert Frost talked about in a beautiful poem are not the possession of classical Lutheran schools or Lutheran congregations alone. Part of our vocation as citizens and believers is to share them with our fellow citizens. We are free in politics and religion not because we inhabit a new nation dedicated to a proposition, as somebody once said, but because we are citizens of what General MacArthur called it in his last great speech to West Point, where he called America this beloved land of culture and ancient descent. Celebrating the Reformation is not a celebration of the invention of new ideas, but the recovery 500 years ago of insights and principles that are thousands of years old. John Adams told his friend, the patriot Dr. Benjamin Rush, "I should as soon think of closing all my window shutters to enable me to see as of banishing the classics to improve Republican ideas," end quotes. Today, as 200 years ago, we need to keep those window shutters open until we understand what John Adams and General Douglas MacArthur were talking about. Thank you for your kind attention. So, we have a few minutes if you want to ask questions. Outrage denunciation is also permissible. Right.
You mentioned all the good things, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here. America has the most liberal abortion laws in the world. And, we've embraced gay marriage, those sorts of things. And that seems to be, when Roe v. Wade passed, most Protestant churches were very quiet. It was just a few Catholic priests who spoke against it. Is that a weakness when you have a church that doesn't believe that it's not very sacramental, they don't tend to hold the body up and have it and that sort of thing. Do you think that kind of may have allowed that to creep in?
Yes, this happened over a period of time. One of Huntington's point is he understands that the United States has become more liberal over time. Though frankly, it's not a very liberal country. We have the weakest unions. We have the strongest military. We really are a very moralistic people in many ways that Europeans find impossible. There are still many Americans who go to church every Sunday. In Europe, you can really enjoy the buildings because nobody's inside, so you can enjoy the great works of art that are there. You use the expression when Roe v. Wade was passed. It's understandable you would use that, but that was not a law passed by any legislature. It was a decision made by a few individuals, and one of his last decisions before he passed away, talking about Obergefell, another similar decision, he said basically, it's not a democracy when a few guys from two law schools, not guys and girls, but when 9 unrepresented people chosen from 2 law schools get to decide what the laws of the country are and completely ignore the legislature and completely ignore the citizens' will in these matters. Well, Roe v. Wade was not the will of the citizens and caused an upheaval in American public life, which no one foresaw. I've noted several times that the court had just in the summer before that January stricken down all the death penalty laws on the grounds they were discriminatory. And the reason why a few years later they refused to rule that they were cruel and unusual is because they were afraid of another explosion, like Roe v. Wade. They've been very clever in winning that battle as a political battle, but notice that most Americans now oppose it. Most Americans don't even know what's going on. Yeah, the courts are a problem. But the courts are not, there are 2 issues. The courts are not the courts ruling our country in an uncontrolled fashion and being able to make law. You were right to say Roe v. Wade was passed. It was a law imposed on the American people with no provision in our Constitution or whatsoever. And the other 2 branches of government are supposed to balance it. Mr. Hamilton in the Federalist Papers said that the courts are the weakest and least dangerous branch. And the reason is because when we had presidents like Andrew Jackson, the court gave a decision he didn't like. He said, Justice Marshall's made his decision, now let him enforce it. And frankly, we need another president who will do that. I name no names. He would be so irresponsible to do something like that. The other point about the development of American Protestantism and American religion, you're absolutely right. But then let's remember that in the founding period, all these Protestant churches were very close to Lutheran. One thing that studies have been done of the wills of the major founders, people who signed declarations, signed the Constitution, and they all begin with very few exceptions. We all know the exceptions, right? Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson. Right. We all know the exceptions, but the great majority of them begin by saying, I trust in my eternal salvation through the blood of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and no action of mine. And you see that over and over and over. Actually, beginning your will that way now, right? The court would rule you non-compos mentis. Give the whole thing away to Planned Parenthood or something. Not to your hands. So yes, there are bad things, but the way to solve the problem is to remind people that we were founded on Lutheran principles, and we need to go back to them if we want to keep our freedoms. Please, Dr. Hunt.
Just remember in January 1973, it did immediately rock our church body. And it created a sense of unbespoken commonality and kinship with our Roman Catholic neighbors in American church life far faster and more profoundly than anything that could have been accomplished by Vatican II. And so it was an immediate sense of a horrific thing that had happened there that voided every single law in every single state relating to abortion in the Union. It was not just slow to hit us, it hit us quickly.
Had a big political effect. Listen, thank you very much for your attention.